Hi, welcome to the European Show. I'm Abby Bella, and this is your new one-stop shop for transcontinental hot political tea and my incredibly cool takes on European and global issues. So join me, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, whatever works for you, and let's take a look at the news. The two big themes in the European Union and in Europe this week were kind of overarching things and moving elements, but they're kind of capped under two very basic but very important ideas. And one is climate change. Should be a no-brainer if we're all going to die. Maybe we should do something about it. And the other one was artificial intelligence and human rights. So again, kind of a no-brainer if we're introducing new technology and if we're investing in a future where we live side by side with technology in complex social ways. It's a bit of a no-brainer to take into account the well-being of the people and their human rights. Make sure there is no robot overlord revolution, but clearly not so simple. Not for a lot of people, it seems. But the European Union is one of those spaces politically these days where I think, at least on paper, at least when it comes to saying the right things and kind of reminding others on the global stage that those things do matter, I think they're still doing a pretty good job. So let's get into it. My first topic today has to be the Biden summit. And I just think a lot of it was kind of hilarious. I know it's a sad time for us because we're looking at the extinction of humanity and stuff like that. But it's just nice to see all these dictators and wannabe dictators and empire leaders and just like everyone who's anyone on these Zoom calls kind of deciding our fate. There's something kind of amusing about that in like a weird way. But also there were some interesting moments, some hot tea as well. But overall, like, it went pretty well. It's obviously a point scoring thing for Biden, him doing this, and he's been scoring some pretty cheap shots in the United States, actually, on the political and opposing political stage, and kind of internal, in terms of internal critique. I believe AOC said he exceeded expectations. That wouldn't be my view, but that's a different thing. So anyway, Biden's been kind of going around. He's kind of on the news in Europe a lot right now as, again, someone who's just scoring a lot of cheap shots and picking up that low-hanging fruit. This was one of those things. Obviously, even Putin isn't going to come to that and say, a summit like this and say, well, yeah, you know, like, I love climate change. I want everyone to die. But at least we're at the stage where most people are okay with saying that it's real and that it's going to affect the varying populations of the world. So that's like a good thing. A lot of commitments were made by some major powers. One small power, Boris Johnson, that's the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson kind of came out with like a weirdly specific figure of something like 68% in emission reductions by 2030, 2040, something like that. It was very specific. He was trying to kind of upstage the show for the European side because he's in a bit of a weird rivalry with the European Union. He was one of the people who are personally responsible for Brexit, actually. So the reason why the United Kingdom is now kind of on its own is predominantly because of Boris Johnson and his campaign against the European Union throughout the decades in the United Kingdom. So anyway, so he came up with like this big figure. He tried to be funny, said some insulting things about tree huggers and bunny huggers, whatever. That's Boris Johnson. That's the Boris show. Is the United Kingdom going to be accountable for any of these targets? No. Boris Johnson isn't going to be a prime minister forever. And considering how much scandal is surrounding him right now, and there's a lot of kind of internal political scandal happening in the United Kingdom at the moment, he's not going to be around to be accountable for any of this. the big thing about Brexit in the United Kingdom is that they wanted to be free to do whatever they want in terms of corporations, in terms of this being a tax haven, in terms of this old boys club. And the old boys club doesn't like people talking about climate change because the old boys club just cares about profit. It doesn't care about a just and equal society, which is what climate change measures would also need to take into account and in some ways lead to. So that's Boris Johnson in the Boris show. The European Union has a Green Deal. So what they proposed was nothing new. The European Union Green Deal, let me just double check the numbers real quick. But the European Union Green Deal has been kind of an agreement, kind of been out there since pretty much 2019. And it's already a set of targets for being a zero emissions continent for Europe by 2050. The thing that changed for this particular meeting with Biden is that people in the EU got together a few days before to kind of set this in stone, so that now actually it is no longer a series of targets in the European Union. It is now a legally binding agreement. So this is now law, and the European Union needs to make sure that this happens, and it needs to ensure that different actors on the European stage, and that's all the different states that are part of the European Union, that everyone adheres to what's being proposed. So no surprises there. The numbers on that are so unprofessional. So found it. The figures are really simple, just like any other climate action that's been proposed as a target at this Biden summit. But this is for the European Union. It's special because they can really call themselves now that they are at the forefront of climate and saving the climate. They're really kind of leading this environmental ambition, but it's still just an ambition. So the European Union is on track to meet its greenhouse gas emissions target for 2020. So that's been confirmed, and it has put forward a plan to cut emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and by the year 2050. That's the big year that a lot of people are kind of focusing on, not just in Europe, but by 2050, Europe is pledging, and this is now legally set in stone, that it is going to be a climate resilient society, and it will be the world's first climate neutral continent. Bold ambition. I applaud it, though. If Europe can be the first, that would be great. The problem with it, of course, is that a lot of people might say it's too little, too late. And even this target of 2050, even if it were true, it might be too late. We just don't know. A lot of the climate change that's happening right now is accelerating at a very alarming rate, and we just don't know if that will be enough. We hope. This is like a good estimate for, like, we hope it's enough. But this is taking into account that Europe, it will be the first in 2050, but it cannot be the last. And 2050 needs to be the year when everybody does this. There's a lot of things that we can no longer prevent when it comes to climate change and the kinds of disasters that await us. For example, the kind of social inequality that will only get exacerbated by the consequences of climate change that we're already seeing in the political third world, quote unquote. That's already happening, and this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. So there's going to be all kinds of displacement, all kinds of misery that is going to be the consequence of a lot of these big empire states enjoying their status for so long, and just historically colonization, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, it's a nice green deal for the EU, and we hope it happens. And it would be, you know, nice and cute if the European Union were the first climate neutral continent, but it needs to be put in a global context. And certainly the thing, you know, this summit with Biden really underlined this. I think for this is kind of something we all know, but it just makes it more apparent how there's always a balance of powers, and the European Union, no matter how forward and progressive thinking it is on climate change, because it is, at least in its heart, that's what it is, compared to some other big powers in the world. And it may well be the, you know, climate neutrality leader, but it needs these other powers, and it needs other people to compete fairly in this race to making this world sustainable and livable in 20, 30, 40 years time. The US and Biden, that's still a satellite of power concentration. We saw the world there at this summit, more or less. And we also saw Putin doing the Putin show. And obviously, there's been a lot of unrest in regards to Russia and Europe these last weeks. Putin's been placing his army around the border with Ukraine, being threatening and crazy like he always is. And he's been, you know, like getting all the attention, talking to people in the European Union, talking to Macron and Merkel and all the bigwigs, and talking to Biden, kind of asserting his whatever power, image, branding. And you know, people were really scared. There were moves in Ukraine to build a hospital, you know, just like put together spaces where you could have hospitals, build kind of fortresses around hospitals, just to make sure that people would be safe. And this is all happening in a pandemic, so it was not like the best situation these past few weeks in the European Union. But I had a feeling that Putin was just doing the Putin show, and, you know, like whether it's about like showing power, asserting power, this was definitely more of a move, and I think most people would agree now that it's kind of de-escalated, and those armed forces are leaving the border with Ukraine. I think the main point is always with Putin, it's either causing trouble to make a point outside of Russia, or it's causing trouble to make a point inside of Russia. But nothing that Putin does is ever without a calculated reason that is all about his Russian brand and about himself selling himself to the people of Russia, or at least doing things in keeping with whatever propaganda fantasy that he has in his mind. And I think this recent thing in Ukraine was definitely a Putin show episode for the people of Russia. And I guess I was right, not to say that I made like a big prediction, but yeah, I was right. This is all for show. I don't think Putin has the will. I don't think there's a lot of will to be doing anything in the Ukraine now. And I think there's a lot of weakness because of the pandemic and other things like this. It was just showing us he's still crazy. And we know you're still crazy. So Putin was there at the summit, and oh my God, like, you know, Boris Johnson tries to do the hair and be like he wants to be like Trump or whatever it is that he's trying to be, but Putin, like, he really has, like, he is such a great performance artist. He's got that brand down to it. Really, like, he does such a great job. I'm going to try and play this clip and hope I don't get flagged for the copyright, but let's take a look. So here's Putin, and he's making everyone wait. Oh, Mr. President, oh my God. Yeah, I mean, it could have been bad Russian internet, but I think it was just Putin doing his Putin thing. It was beautiful. Like, he upstaged every one of these psychopaths. So, That says a lot. So that's Putin. But Putin at least he actually underlined like the importance of like working together in cooperation. He didn't say anything that was particularly surprising. He didn't make any big commitments, but he was also kind of, he was still there. He was still there despite this kind of tense moment on the European and world stage regarding Ukraine, which for now at least appears to be safe from his wandering political eye. So that was the summit. People made these it's all the same things over and over again. We hear 2050 all the time, carbon emissions, whatever. Is it enough? Probably not. I'm not an environmental expert. I know that a lot of these assessments differ, and a lot of these, visions of how to do some of these things will be different for different people. But I think what is pretty clear is that if you're talking about like zero emissions, you're talking about uprooting the structure of entire societies and cities. This isn't just things like cars and transportation. This is things like housing, and what are you going to do about that, and who's going to pay for that, and how is that going to affect people who don't have money, who live in these European states? Not all of these European states have proper welfare. There are people who will be made destitute by positive changes for the environment. So you need to factor all of those things in. It cannot just be a drive regardless of human impact for a greener Europe, when there are people dying because of the consequences of climate change all around the world, because their ability to feed themselves, their ability to live on their land is made impossible because there's either too much rain or too little rain. It's too hot or not hot enough because of the changes that we caused. It can't be like that. We can't just build pretty houses for the rich and outlaw self-sustenance for people who have no choice but to use certain types of gas or whatever in their house. So it needs to be this, like, these kinds of projects are always scary because it's going to be either two things. Like, there's two options for this. And let's just take the European Union as an example, because it's a neat example, and you can just go state by state, country by country, and see how it kind of checks out. If we want to be a climate neutral continent by 2050, you're looking at restructuring everything and making a lot of things available to the people at no charge. A lot of these countries in the EU, they're very cold. It's really cold here in the winter. People will die if they don't have proper heating, if they don't have proper housing, if they can't have everything done in a way that is, like adequate for their survival. So you need this, and you need to revamp transport. You need to do so many things. The only way you're going to do that is if you build these big communist cities where people don't have to pay extra for their housing, or maybe housing is made available to everyone, or there's some tier system where people who can afford it can pay for their housing and they subsidize their neighbors somehow. But you can't build a utopian climate neutral continent without taking into account the lives of the people in your countries. There will have to be some kind of a universal wage, or revamping of the predominant centrist neoliberal system that we have in the European Union, if the European Union is going to meet its target. The other way to do it, of course, is to just tax the hell out of the little people and prevent them from using certain modes of heating, certain non-climate neutral facilities of life, and you just kind of come down on those little people, retain the riches with the rich, and let the little people die, and let the middle class become so poor that they become the new underclass, and so on and so forth, as Slavoj Žižek might say. It could be any one of these. The European Union can't do the second option because at least in terms of optics, they wouldn't want to do it. And if there's any hope for anyone in this new future, I think the European Union is probably a pretty safe bet if you want to find a place where you might have a fighting chance, if you're not a millionaire, to survive the decades that are coming for us of increased climate change, increased cataclysmic conditions in which we will have to face this. We're facing it now, and it's coming for us more and more and more. And it wouldn't be the European show without a little bit of racism. That's right. We're in Denmark for some racism, and this is like some serious racism. This isn't like racism like this is state-of-the-art OG fascist racism. Like, by OG fascism, I mean the actual OG fascism. Because that's Europe. Denmark. In 2019, there was an election in Denmark, and Denmark, became this country that elected a president that's a part of the Social Democratic Party in Denmark. Her name is Mette Frederiksen. I'm going to butcher everybody's name today. But I think it's Mette Frederiksen. And she's this woman who was elected, under 40, really, one of those cool young politicians. And it was a big deal because she's a woman, and Denmark is so equal opportunities. Amazing. Europeans patting themselves on the back. The problem with her is that even though she's a social democrat, when she was campaigning in 2019, she came across a problem when it comes to public opinion in Denmark. And there's been a lot of anti-immigrant feeling in Denmark. A lot of it is from just traditions of racism in Denmark, really. A lot of countries, these countries that we think of that are these forward-thinking, equal opportunities, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, these countries are not immune to racism, or Norway, and they it happens there. It happens a lot. You see it in Sweden a lot. There's this unspoken kind of white supremacy that people have. Not all of them. Again, this is probably a small portion of the population, but it's the usual stuff. Sometimes you see a Swedish flag in Sweden and you kind of know that it's meant to mean that these people don't like anyone that's not white, and you have to be the right kind of white as well. So it's it's really not surprising regarding Denmark. And this so you have this precondition of kind of white supremacist thinking in these northern and West European countries, and then to add to that, you have the migrant crisis of 2015, what I call a crisis of world superpowers displacing people for their own political ends. And then crying about the fact that these displaced people have come to them for help. Europe saw an influx of immigrants from countries like Syria, like Afghanistan, because of the active wars that were happening there, with the involvement of powers like the European Union, various countries in the European Union, the UK, obviously the US. So no surprise, a lot of these people were coming from the Middle East seeking help, thinking they would get help because they were coming from a war zone, especially in Syria, active war zone. They wanted to live. That's all. They just wanted to live. And there was a big response in Europe, and a lot of it was really racist. A lot of racists came out and kind of identified themselves. The racism was interspersed with Islamophobia. It's the usual cocktail of stupidity. And a lot of countries refuse to take in migrants. These are refugees, actually. They're not migrants. Migrants are expats. A migrant is a Danish person who goes and lives in Belgium for 2 years for their master. That's a migrant. This is this is people who needed help, whose lives were in danger, who had nowhere to live, nowhere to go, because their countries were destroyed by Western interference. And a lot of these states in the European Union just flat out said, no, we're not taking in migrants because we're Christian states and we don't want any brown people. We want, we want to be white here. We want to be white. And we don't want anyone who's not white or Christian, whatever white means, or Christian for that matter, considering how these people behaved. A lot of those countries, funnily enough, were Eastern European countries. The same countries who decades before, when they were persecuted by both the fascist forces of Nazi Germany in World War II, and later by USSR communist oppression, had a lot of help from countries like Syria, and were welcomed with open arms by, for example, Syrians in the 1940s during World War II. There's like accounts of people, like literal, this is like Poland, the former Yugoslavia, kind of different states on that eastern side of Europe, receiving a lot of help and a lot of love from these, these horrible brown Muslim people, greeting them with food when these people had been starving for years because of a war started by a white supremacist, insane maniac. So that happened, but they forgot about that. And by the time kind of history came around in this karmic cycle of destruction, these same countries with these same people whose grandparents received love and unconditional help, like this was thousands of people. So all these people in these states in the European Union, not all of them, I'm talking about the Visegrad countries, Poland, Czech Republic, I'm talking about Hungary, who are former USSR states. They should understand colonialism, oppression, and racism. A lot of these people were massacred by Red Russian, USSR communist forces, tortured, killed for years and decades, right? So they should know something about solidarity, stuff like that. No, they refused to take in any quota of migrants. Various countries were very, and this is not just these like Visegrad, Eastern European countries, other countries in Western Europe were kind of suddenly had the same attitude of crazy racism. And a lot of the countries that are meant to be progressive, like Denmark, their excuse for this was that they didn't, they objected to a lot of the underlying misogyny in Muslim culture, and they didn't want to have that in their society or whatever. So they put all these caps and measures on immigration. And this kind of just grew and grew and grew in Europe. Angela Merkel, she took in 2 million refugees from countries like Syria, and she nearly people love her. She's been around for 20 years. She's been in charge for a very long time. Germans love her. They don't really see, for a long time, people just didn't see an alternative to her, but that really pissed people off, and she lost a lot of support just by doing that, just by showing this obvious humanity that you ought to show to people, especially people so close to you, geographically and culturally. But yeah, so all this racism started coming out, and Denmark did take in migrants. They didn't refuse to take in any migrants. They did take in migrants. But they started doing funny things about this. They started being all funny about it. They put all these special regulations on it, and then they introduced what is called the jewelry law. This is before Mette Frederiksen became president, but this is something that's pertinent to the discussion today about the present situation in Denmark. This is before she became president, but I hope so. I'll fact check that in a second. But Denmark has this jewelry law. It's called the jewelry law. And it means that if I can't even say it. If you're a refugee who's coming from a war zone in a country that clearly, Danish troops are in that country right now, and you're coming to Denmark and you seek asylum and you seek protection, as a migrant, refugee, whatever status you have at the time, they can confiscate your jewelry if it's worth in excess of X amount of euros, Danish krona, whatever. That's the law. They're checking the migrants. The migrants are coming in. They're checking them for like gold. It's a good thing it's not gold teeth, although I'm not sure if that's like on the list. Because that has, to me, and especially like if it living in Europe and seeing this and you see it and you feel it on the streets, it's also close to, the past, and you're constantly like reminded of the past here. Like that just has these like really uncomfortable Holocaust vibes that like everyone immediately can see. Like it's pretty clear. The minute you hear that, you're like, yeah, Holocaust vibes. Denmark, shame on you. And Mette Frederiksen, who is not a fascist, doesn't identify as a fascist, is okay with these laws. She has upheld this. This whole like, we'll take in the migrants, but we don't want too many. At the moment in Denmark, this is years after the migrant crisis. This is years into a continuing hostility situation in Syria. At the moment, there's something like 35,000 Syrian refugees living in Denmark. A lot of them by now, if they've had children, their children are basically Danish, born there, raised there, whatever. A lot of the people, obviously, if you've been there like for 10 years, 5 years, whatever, you've integrated into this society, you've built a life for yourself. And also, you clearly don't want to be going back to the place that you ran away from because you knew that your life was in danger if the danger is still actively in that country. Nevertheless, the Danish government has decided that it's going to start sending people back to Syria. Yeah, like this is not like a hoax, like this is true. They're sending people back to Syria. Now, pretty much every other European country, including world organizations like the United Nations, Amnesty International, they're pretty clear on this, that like you can't be sending people back to a country with active conflict or to a place where they will be in danger. And Syria is one of those places. No one should be sent back to Syria today. It's not peaceful, it's not safe. The Danish government begs to differ, and they decided that it is safe enough, and there's certain places you can get sent back to, and they're just randomly sending people back. This is on the heels of something that's been kind of happening in Denmark under this present progressive administration. And it's this idea that there's like a lot of like racist narrative in Denmark about how, yes, we're accepting refugees and we're going to house them and help them. But the objective of accepting refugees is not to house them and help them and be their friends forever and ever. It's with the objective of repatriation. All these like Nazi vibes here, like real like fash vibes going through, like OG fascism. Repatriation. Great. Nice. Just send them somewhere, hope it's like probably won't work out, probably it's just gonna be death, but who cares? They're refugees. They're not Danish. And like there's like all kinds of like caveat, like there's like additions to this, like a lot of legislation in Denmark that I was shocked by, because like a lot of it is like that like makes plain that these objectives for repatriation rather than assimilation are for all migrants that are not like Western European, which is like half of Europe itself, which is like against every policy of the European Union and it's just incredible. They just don't want anybody there. This is shameful. This is shameful. This is unacceptable in modern Europe. And what they've been doing is they've already been doing this. And what they've done is, because it's like a whole legal headache, right? Because, I mean, this is a modern Western country that's part of the European Union, part of like civilized society. And they're basically sending people back to a war zone. They're sending people back to a place of death. They're claiming it's safe. So they don't have diplomatic relations with Syria, obviously, because nobody does. And they can't really deport the people there to Syria because they have a diplomatic relation, so it's not a deportation. So it's just a repatriation. And because they're not like in direct communication with Syria, it's kind of up to the deportees themselves to like choose whether they want to go. And this is the choice that Syrian refugees from Syria are getting at the moment. They have two choices. You either go back to Syria, and they give you some money for it too. They pay you. They want to get rid of the problem. Maybe they thought if they threw money at it, it would be easier to like get people to shut up about it or something. I don't know. So it's like, it's like fascist vibes, but like fascism, there's like a sugar coating of bribery and whatever. So they're giving people some money. It's not enough. Nothing is enough to start your life anew by yourself. These are people. A lot of these people are getting separated from their families to like go to a place that's been completely wrecked by a war you had nothing to do with and no control over. But yeah, so they give you a bit of money. They pay for your ticket, and they're like, you need to go back to Syria. Your second option, because we can't really force you to go back to Syria, because Syria is not like a legit place to have diplomatic relations with, so we can't deport you. But what we will do is we will put you in a deportation center outside of a big city. I think there's a deportation center outside of Copenhagen, where no one can see it. Just, we're going to put you in the center. It's basically a prison. And you're just going to stay there forever until you make up your mind to leave our country. And these are people who are living, like, fulfilling normal lives. They have jobs. They're, like, teaching in schools, doing whatever it is. Maybe they're students. And now the Danish government is like suddenly saying, well, no, you just gotta stop what you're doing. Stop what you're doing. Which one do you want? Do you want to go to this bizarre halfway house deportation prison, or do you want to go back to Syria? This is breaking every human rights commitment that countries like Denmark supposedly have made. They think that there's like a sneaky way to make legislation like this work, whatever. There's no sneaky way. This is against the commitments of the European Union. It's against any understanding of a universal human rights. And the cherry on top with this is that they're not sending men back to Syria of a certain age, because if they did, then these men might get put into the military. And they might be forced to fight in Syria, where supposedly things are safe and it's not a war zone. But Denmark can't be doing that, because that's another international loophole that it can't be feeding the present scandalous situation in Syria and sending people to be fighting there. So they're not sending men of a certain age. The men are safe. It's the women who suffer. Particularly the single women, I should imagine, as always. And that is the choice for women. In this country, Denmark, that keeps on complaining and insinuating and just outright saying Yeah, there's an Islamophobia in Denmark because a lot of people don't like the way that Muslim men treat women. So to teach them a lesson, we're going to send these vulnerable women back to Syria. That's going to teach them a lesson. That's the way to integrate. That's the way to be European. That is like, everything about this is wrong. And the European Union will react to this, and there will be consequences for Denmark. There were countries before who tried to do this and who tried to use the same kind of racist, Islamophobic language. For example, Poland and Hungary. They have already been sanctioned. It takes a long time in the European Union, but they do get you. But this is shameful. And, you know, there's a lot of racism in Eastern Europe. And the reason why that's happening is because, and it's not an excuse, but it's a fair enough historical explanation. These people have been battered and kind of triumphed over by various totalitarian regimes. Places like Czech Republic, that entire society was functioning behind an iron curtain for like the best part of the 20th century. They had no communication with the outside world. They couldn't, verify certain ideologies, and they inherited a lot of racism from the USSR. And they also inherited a lot of racism just by virtue of the different kind of, whatever backwards cultural forces were at play there at the time. Poland. There's a lot of racism in Poland that is fueled specifically by the Catholic Church there, which is basically a kind of fascist cult at this point. And people love the Catholic Church there because the Catholic Church kind of fought against communism because they're fascists. And they're not honestly, there's all these weird, weird historical discrepancies in these countries. You can just simply say, in a place of extreme deprivation where your country, your culture has been colonized by these people and that people, constant battles and constant unrest and fear and literal ethnic cleansing. You might be funny about some things. You can, this is the traumatized kind of lashing out at the traumatized. Denmark, on the other hand, is a land that's had peace forever. They didn't suffer during World War II. They weren't colonized. They weren't, none of that happened in Denmark. On the same scale, at least. There's all kinds of histories, 19th century, 20th century histories that are relevant to Europe, of course. But Denmark is not a deprived country where people lived in literal ignorance, where people couldn't read a newspaper from outside of that country and get shot for it. There is no excuse for Danish racism, and there is no excuse, especially because Denmark wants to be seen as a progressive country that is all about equal rights, that is all about women. So you do know better. And if you're Danish and watching this, and if you're offended by this, I'm sorry. And I know that there's really great left people in Denmark. I know there's normal people in Denmark, and I'm sorry that I'm generalizing, and I generalize a lot with some of these histories, but I mean, I've been affected by this personally. And generations of people are affected by these by this type of political framing. It's not okay. And we need to fight this, and the left needs to, again, just get together in Europe and wherever you are, whoever you are, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Poland, wherever, whoever. This is completely unacceptable. And of all the places in the world for it to happen in Europe, in the European Union, today, we're sending women out to die, and your excuse for it is because what, women's rights or Islamophobia, or which one is it? Back to a country we destroyed, and by the way, it's the same country that welcomed people like you, people like me, when we were in trouble, who had nothing but generosity and kindness and safety, didn't make a big deal of it. Whatever the fears are among like a lot of these like right-center people in terms of kind of, cultural conflict in the European Union, how like they say, a lot of right people in Europe say, well, I'm not Islamophobic, but whatever, there are laws of the land that protect citizens. You will not lose your rights just because someone chooses to live in a particular cultural way. And you know what? Like, if your culture is Christianity and if your culture is to be Islamophobic, then I guess people who follow Islam are just a little bit better than you. Because the ingratitude and the inhumanity of this is just mind-boggling. Even the Pope, okay, like speaking of culture wars between Islam and Christianity in Europe, this is like a real thing. Some people are really concerned about this. One of the figureheads of the system, the actual Catholic Pope, recently, he just spoke out about this. He did his speech, he comes out at St. Peter's Square. I don't know if it's daily, it's like a regular thing. He comes out on the balcony and he says things to like his people, on his balcony that's worth like billions and trillions of euros, and in his major gold encrusted palace full of secrets and treasures we will never see. But okay, the Pope came out and the Pope was like, another dinghy full of migrants didn't get help out at sea. It was and this is something that happens kind of regularly here. Sometimes it's more people, sometimes it's less. So far, something like 250 people have died at sea because they didn't get assistance from border patrol on the European side, and they were coming from places kind of beyond Syria. From places like Syria. So they were like in this tiny dinghy, 130 people, and they knew they were in distress. A lot of these are dangerous little boats, pontoons, whatever you want to call them. And people risk their life because they have no choice. And it's still happening, even though the migrant crisis has ended officially in Europe. But they're coming because they have no choice. And 100 people, 50 people here, 50 people there. There's like these incidents all the time of migrants and refugees drowning at sea. And it's like apparent in this particular case that the Pope spoke about. It was 130 people. And they sent distress signals to various countries en route. So Libya, Italy, various countries. And these various border forces received it, kind of communicated with, like Libya told Italy and Italy told somebody else that like these people were in trouble. But nobody helped them. 2 days they were sending that distress signal, begging for help, and nobody helped them because like they just kept fobbing it off on other people. Because the feeling is, we don't want to take the migrants. Well, we don't want them. Like, just like leave it out in the sea. Maybe the problem will disappear. And it didn't disappear the way they imagined it, because the people drowned. And the Pope made a fuss about it. Like, what are you doing? And speaking of women and weird cycles of history and fate, the European Council has this like kind of revolving circle of certain prizes it gives out to people for doing good stuff in the world. And one such prize is the Vaclav Havel Human Rights Prize. It's a great prize. Vaclav Havel is, of course, an iconic figure in European history. Speaking of the former USSR satellite states and post-communist regimes, he then became the first democratic president, I believe, of the Czech Republic. But he was just mainly this kind of iconic intellectual and politician at a time when the USSR was falling, the Berlin Wall, that major historic divide in Europe that propelled then the growth of the European Union happened. And even like for me, he's like an iconic voice of unification and a very important part of European history. So Václav Havel, Human Rights Prize. We love Havel. Czech Republic. And the Human Rights Prize has been given to Lujain al-Hathul. And Lujain al-Hathul is, of course, the leader, one of the leaders, and again, icons of the Women to Drive movement in Saudi Arabia, and just general kind of human rights movement for women in Saudi Arabia. She campaigned against the male guardianship system in Saudi, just like basic, the ability of women to just exist. She has since then been imprisoned and been subject to torture, according to her sister. And it is not a pretty sight. So the Saudi government basically thought that a woman driving a car was a terrorist, an act of terrorism. And they tortured her and they imprisoned her. She has been let go since then. But her sister, who accepted the prize on her behalf, told the Václav Havel Prize Committee that her sister not only could she not be there because she's still being silenced by Saudi Arabia, and she couldn't speak out because there's a travel ban on her. That's pretty bad. We'll see what happens. I think, I know she has, and I hope like the support for her and women like her and the movement is undeterred and undiminished for all the madness of this Saudi Arabian logic on women. But I thought it was very poetic and very nice that she did receive the prize. I thought it was, it's heart-wrenching watching her sister receive the prize for her. But it also made me think about the way that we discuss and tokenize these things. Because this whole thing became pretty big, the media had to kind of write about it. Time magazine actually named Lujain as one of the 100 most influential people of 2019. This is a woman who got arrested for being an activist for driving a car. If she is so influential, and if this cause is so influential, and if women are so influential around the world, according to Time magazine, and if women are so important in all these states that are waging war at this moment in time on a lot of Middle Eastern countries and countries around the world, including Denmark, well then, I guess we're going to be invading Saudi Arabia anytime now, right? Yeah, of course not. Of course not. Because the influence isn't true. It's tokenism at its lowest and worst. Like, these, honors, 100 of the most influential people, whatever. And in a way, the same goes for the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. Yeah, okay. But, what about those human rights? And why is it a little prize that's kind of handed out as part of the European Council initiative? This should be a big thing. The way that Václav Havel managed to make it a big thing and became a true icon in politics and history. There just, there just needs to be a little bit more hardened ability amongst European and world politicians to call a spade and say that this is unacceptable. Women should not be in prison anywhere for being women or for driving. And no matter what the interests are in terms of Saudi Arabia, this should just not be acceptable. And if you do find it acceptable as a state or as a legislation or as a government or administration, then just say you just don't care. Then you just call it what it is. We don't care. It doesn't matter. Lou Jane is not that important. What's important is money and influence and oil, and that's what's important. She's not important, and women are not important, and women are not important in Denmark. They're being victimized by racist aggression in Denmark. Just all these states, like, it's just the worst excuse in the world, and you hear it, like, from time to time, people still use it. I mean, Macron, when he, like, or France in general, the way that they're treating women in France right now is disgusting. And the ban on facial covering and just like even like going down to like how women are allowed to dress on the beach, like they're literally telling women how to dress because they're trying to save women from being part of a horrible Muslim system where men tell them what to do and how to dress. This is why the French government is telling women how to dress for years. Lou Jane, the most influential person, like one of the 100 most influential. I don't think she's that influential. I think the people with power and money are influential, and the racists are influential in Denmark right now, and they're hurting women. And I think it's also funny and so like ironically distasteful that like Vaclav Havel was at this like, you know, like at the helm of this freedom movement in Eastern Europe, and like his country is now like this disgusting viper's nest for nationalism and racism. And Lou Jane, like a lot of people in the Czech Republic today would not be happy to have Lou Jane live in the Czech Republic because they have something real racist to say about her out of ignorance or whatever it is. Racist ignorance. It's like we never learn. We just never, ever learn. And in Europe, of all places, people should be crystal clear on the history because it's out there. Like you leave your house, there's like a plaque here, a memorial there, like it's all like this is where people got killed. Like some guy said something racist, then he like bombed people here. Like it's like basically Europe is the museum. Like it's a lived-in, interactive museum for how not to live your life as a nation, and how to be a better person, and how not to kill people. But we don't learn. One final European story here is the Armenian Genocide that was remembered yesterday. It was the Day of Remembrance. And the European Union and most European countries don't struggle with the idea that a genocide happened in Armenia, a genocide of Armenian people happened at the beginning of the 20th century. The guy who came up with the term genocide, Raphael Lemkin, and later used that to describe what happened to the Jewish people in the Holocaust, and that's also a very important part of kind of the history of universal justice and those types of ideas in Europe. You know, later that term genocide would become really important. There's like all kinds of things in place today that use these this kind of nomenclature. Lemkin was the guy for that, and you know, like he kind of saw that what was happening in Armenia was like he was like, well, that's what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking what I'm trying to define as genocide. That's like an example. The European Union, I think officially as the European Union recognized this in like 2000 or something, just like officially call it a genocide. The present government of Turkey is the nationalist government. So they're gonna, like, it's part of their brand to oppose any kind of, like, you know, any justice, any truth telling, things like that. So they hate it when people mention the Armenian genocide, but it's all for show. Like, Erdogan doesn't care. He's like, here's another leader where it's like the Erdogan show. He doesn't really care. It's part of his nationalist brand. So Biden came out and recognized the Armenian genocide. Picking that low-hanging fruit, and like now he's some kind of a hero. Anyway, he's like, just because he's the first US president to just say it out loud, and it's like a whole thing, even though like it's been officially recognized by other political structures in the United States. It's like a big deal that Biden said this. And, you know, he got all these brownie points with the people of Armenia. And Erdogan made a show of pouting and whatever. I don't think that there's going to be any consequences to that. I know that people think that, like, I don't really understand exactly, like, maybe there's something I'm completely missing, but I really don't understand why it's, like, taken so long for an American president to, like, North American president to say that. And I know it's, like, you know, implicated in different types of deals and different types of relations with Turkey and around Turkey. But at the same time, I think it's just, like, I honestly just don't think that most people before him just thought it was a major deal, and I think some people just don't care about the universal justice of it, like the Bushes, the Clintons before, like they just don't care. It's just not big enough. It's just a tiny little country in Europe. I think it just wasn't a priority. I don't think it was to like appease Turkey or anything like that. And I don't think it's a problem that Erdogan will make like a show of it. It's going to improve his ratings if he says like bad things about Biden now, because like, you know, for his nationalist audience, nothing will come of it. European countries have been calling it a genocide for years. And like, this is like a literal country in Europe. Turkey is like here, and there's been no consequences other than, again, like, whenever Erdogan brings that up, it's good for the ratings and it's good for his image, and it doesn't really affect anything other than showing respect and showing remembrance to the people who were victimized by this genocide and to people in Armenia today. It's just part of being European and like a globally minded, historically educated person. But yeah, I just wanted to make that little point. I just like, because I see even on Euronews, people are like, oh, Biden, he's so great. He said the Armenian genocide happened. Well, I mean, yeah, thanks, Sherlock. Like, it's a problem that it took a lot of like the world stage to discuss it for various geopolitical reasons. There's a lot of very complicated, very unpleasant history in Europe, and that's just one example, right? But he didn't do anything special. I really honestly think that Biden is on this like track for low-hanging fruit, and he's picking like the most distant, insignificant to current U.S. policy fruit possible in doing this. I'm like, yeah, there's no praise. Yeah, it's good that it was acknowledged, but it really should not, this should not be like people praising him for that. This is like the least he could do. The least. And it's not news for anyone else in the world. It's just news to one of the most powerful men in the world, apparently. Thank you for watching. This is all super new, so I appreciate you so much. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I will see you next time for some hot European tea, and stay safe out there.